The sun, a raw, indifferent eye, glared down upon the Tanzanian savanna. It was the dry time. Kala, the lead hunter, strong-limbed, eyes the color of dry river stones, moved with a fluid, earth-hugging crouch. Her back, scored with the pale lines of old predator encounters, was a map of past survival. Behind her, Emma W., the toolmaker, hefted a freshly worked biface. A teardrop-shaped hand axe chipped from volcanic rock, its edges glinting with lethal promise. Their target, a young wildebeest separated from the main herd, cropping sparse, sun-cured grass near a lone acacia. Kala raised a clenched fist, a silent command for the 5 hunters to fan out. They moved not as individuals, but as one mind, utilizing the low scrub and the rhythmic sway of tall grasses as cover. The air vibrated with the heat and the low thrum of effort. Ma's hand gripped a sharpened wooden spear, its tip hardened in the embers of last night's fire. This was no desperate chase. This was calculated, intelligent predation. The scent of ozone, carried on the thin breeze, hinted at a storm building far to the west, but hunger silenced caution. Kala launched the attack. She exploded from the brush, her yell, a wordless, guttural sound, tearing the silence. The wildebeest bolted. The hunters didn't pursue, they intercepted. They drove the frantic beast not toward the open plains, but toward a narrow, boulder-strewn defile. Ma, faster than his bulk suggested, threw his hand axe. It spun, catching the wildebeest's flank, not felling it, but turning it, forcing the animal to stumble directly into the path of Tora, the youngest. Tora, a flash of fear and primal instinct, plunged his spear. It hit bone. The animal stumbled, crying out, a broken sound that pierced the savanna's calm. Victory. A rush of hot, metallic satisfaction washed over the group. They gathered, preparing to butcher the carcass, Ma taking the first, careful cuts with his prized biface. Suddenly a shadow fell, not from the setting sun, but from the earth itself. A roar, deep, resonant, and too close, shattered the moment of triumph. A massive lion had been stalking the wildebeest and now laid claim to the kill. It was an old male, its mane dark and thick, its eyes burning with territorial rage. Kala reacted before the roar even finished echoing. She didn't freeze. She became a coiled spring of calculated aggression. She barked a series of sharp, clicking sounds, not language, but a battle rhythm. Leave the meat. Fight for the line. The hunters formed a shallow crescent, Ma and Kala at the center, their tools raised defensively. But the lion was too fast, too bold. It didn't lunge for the meat. It surged directly at the threat. It targeted Kim, the elder, whose movement was slowed by a years-old hip injury. A terrifying snarl. Kim cried out, a sound of pain and surprise, as the lion's paw struck his shoulder, knocking him to the dust. Kala moved instantly. She screamed a piercing, wordless challenge, diverting the beast's attention. She didn't attack. She feinted, drawing the lion away from the injured Kim and the kill, toward a patch of dry grass they had carefully avoided earlier. Ma and Tora, understanding the desperate strategy, scooped up the precious wildebeest carcass. A massive burden, but necessary. They retreated rapidly, dragging the meat and the injured Kim toward their nearby camp in a shallow cave entrance. Kala, having successfully lured the lion, now faced a desperate retreat. She was separated, alone. As the lion prepared to spring, she did the only thing that could stop a charge. She had a small, invaluable burden strapped to her waist. A bundle of dried fungi and tinder containing the embers of the sacred fire, nurtured from a lightning strike months ago. She threw the embers into the dry grass and stomped on them. Flash. A thin curl of smoke. Then the brittle savanna ignited. Not a blazing inferno, but a sharp, spitting line of flame that surprised and deterred the territorial beast. The lion hesitated, its eyes wide with ancestral caution. Fire was not a weapon it understood. Kala used the brief distraction to sprint. She ran until her lungs burned, crossing the defile and crashing into the temporary safety of the cave. She collapsed, safe, but the cost was evident. The main fire bundle was gone, left in the charge, sacrificed to save her life and the kill. They had food, but they had lost their most vital technology. The cave was safe, but the night, already descending, would be long, cold, and dark. The smell of raw meat would draw every scavenger for miles. Without fire, they were only animals again. The hours of darkness were a torment of tension. They huddled in the cave mouth, the bloody wildebeest carcass a heavy, silent presence. Kim, the elder, tended by Lya, the young woman whose hands possessed a primal understanding of healing plants, slept fitfully, his breathing ragged. Leia chewed a bitter root, a natural painkiller, and pressed the pulp onto the lion's deep claw marks. Kala watched the darkness. She saw the glittering eyes of hyenas gathered just beyond the cave's protective overhang. She heard the sawing rasp of a leopard in the trees. The group was exhausted, wounded, and without the crucial psychological shield of fire. At the first gray light of dawn, they moved. Survival demanded movement, not defense. They carried the remaining meat, Kim's injured body wrapped in a crude sling, and a small, whimpering child, Nuru, carried securely by Leia. Their destination. The Great Ridge, a known landmark many days' travel north, where a permanent water-fed forest offered a chance for refuge and, critically, the Dents would needed to practice the difficult art of fire drilling, if the fire was truly lost. The journey became an exhausting trek under the relentless sun. The water they carried in a treated animal bladder quickly dwindled. Thirst became a presence as palpable as the heat. Ma, walking backward, constantly scanned the horizon for predators, his hand axe a grim comfort. Midday. The sun beat down, turning the sparse landscape into a shimmering, cruel mirage. They crossed a field of cracked clay, the residue of a dried-up seasonal lake. The heat was dizzying. Then Tora, scouting ahead, signaled violently. Not a predator. Something worse. Another group of hominids. Not their kind. Tora's description, conveyed through rapid gestures, shorter, stockier, with massive brow ridges, identified them as a small, desperate group of archaic Homo sapiens, the strangers. They were gathered at the only surviving water source in this immediate area, a sluggish, muddy pool barely large enough to sustain one group. The strangers were drinking, their bodies hunched, their demeanor defensive and wary. Their tools were different, sharper, flakier, made from a finer, more distant type of stone. This was the ultimate primal choice. Cooperation or confrontation for the last sip of life-giving water. A fragile offer. Kala's group, weary, injured, and burdened by the meat, paused. Her eyes met Ma's. There was no shared language, only the common, terrifying pressure of survival. One of the strangers, a female with fierce, intelligent eyes, stood and raised a crudely sharpened rock, a clear warning. Kala, taking a breath that burned her throat, made her choice. She walked forward, alone. She did not raise her spear. Instead, she took the precious animal bladder, half full of their dwindling, warm water, and laid it in the dust between the two groups. It was a gesture of vulnerability and offering. The stranger female eyed the bladder, then Kala's exposed throat. The silence was absolute, save for the buzzing flies. Kala then turned and pointed a steady finger at her mouth, then at the pool, and finally, with profound significance, at the injured Kim. We need water for life. We have life meat to trade. The stranger female paused. Survival logic trumped instinct. The strangers had no meat, only small roots and scraps. The deal was struck in silence. The stranger female approached, her movement tense. She took a deep drink from the pool, then dipped a massive, hollowed gourd into the mud, offering the precious, filthy water to the injured Kim first. A fragile détente. They shared the muddy pool in shifts, guarded and silent. Kala's group offered a portion of the wildebeest, a shared sacrifice, a primal pact. For a brief hour, two competing lines of human destiny existed side by side, united only by the universal currency of thirst. With renewed, if muddy, water, they pushed on toward the Great Ridge. It rose like a rampart on the horizon, a monumental wall of dark basalt, crowned with the promise of dense forest canopy. As they reached the base of the ridge, the storm that had been brewing for days finally descended. It wasn't a rain shower. It was a deluge, a furious, blinding curtain of wind and water. The dry ravines became instant, roaring torrents. They were trapped between the flooding ravines and the slick, vertical face of the ridge. Then, the final, earth-shaking confrontation. The flood's roar masked a predator's approach. A shadow detached itself from the storm-swept trees. A magnificent, terrifying saber-toothed cat, Homo erectus. It hadn't come for the meat. It had been driven from its lair by the sudden flooding. It was desperate, cold, and saw the hominids not as prey, but as obstacles to safety. It didn't hesitate. It sprang toward the small child, Nuru, who was still clutched to Leia's chest. Kala screamed a pure, reflexive sound of terror and defiance. She hurled her remaining spear, but the rain skewed its flight. Mo reacted with a ferocity born of tool mastery. He didn't use his hand axe for chopping. He used it as a shield and a fist. He intercepted the cat's charge, meeting the monstrous animal with a primal, head-on impact. The cat's massive canines raked across Ma's outstretched arm, a blinding flash of red against the gray rain. The pain was agonizing, but Ma did not fall. He had bought a single, critical heartbeat. Kala saw her chance. Tora had been trying desperately to scale the slick rock face. He had reached a small, accessible ledge. She grabbed a fallen tree branch, half-rotted, heavy, and swung it with all her strength at the cat's exposed flank. The blow was solid. The cat, surprised by the sudden pain and struggling on the slick mud, momentarily lost its footing. Now, Kala signaled, her face a mask of desperation. Climb! Ma, gripping his shattered arm, moved Leia, Nuru, and the injured Kim toward the ledge. Tora reached down, pulling them one by one. Kala and Ma were the last. The cat, recovering, let out a piercing shriek of fury and pain. It lunged for Ma's leg. Ma kicked out, connecting with the cat's head, staggering it once more. Then, Kala reached up, her hand closing around Ma's uninjured arm. With a final, shared heave, they scrambled onto the ledge, pulling themselves beyond the cat's reach. Below, the saber-tooth thrashed, roaring its fury at the impenetrable wall and the rising, muddy torrent. They had survived, but Ma was gravely wounded. The narrow ledge eventually widened into a small, dry cave, high on the great ridge. Inside, the air was still, safe from the storm's violence. They rested, their breathing the only sound. Leia, the healer, immediately went to work. She cleansed Ma's deep wounds with precious rainwater gathered in cupped hands and dressed them with a poultice made from the leaves of mountain herbs she had gathered in a foresightful moment during the slow climb. Kim, the elder, watched. His injury was serious, but he was alive. Kala moved to the cave mouth. The storm had passed, leaving behind an atmosphere of crystalline clarity. The valley floor was a lake, the savanna transformed, cleansed. She looked at Ma, whose eyes reflected quiet stoicism. His survival was contingent upon the care of the group. Then, she looked at Tora, who was methodically rubbing 2 sticks of fine, dry cedar wood he'd found on the cave floor. The first time he was attempting the difficult fire drill method. He failed. Frustration flickered in his eyes. Kala knelt beside him. She took the 2 sticks, but instead of the drill method, she took 2 pieces of quartzite rock. Pieces they had carried for tools. She struck them together, methodically, patiently, sparks flying against a bed of dried moss. This was the ancient, reliable, lightning-fast method, necessary in an emergency. Clack, clack, clack. A tiny, fragile ember caught. Tora watched, awe in his eyes. Ma watched, a slow, painful smile touching his lips. Leia, comforting Nuru, watched. Kala gently blew on the moss. A flicker, a wisp of smoke. Then, a small, welcoming flame. She fed it carefully, a few dry twigs, then larger branches. The fire grew, licking the darkness, filling the cave with the scent of warmth and protection. It cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, the oldest story ever told. Man and the flame. They gathered around it, Hunter, toolmaker, healer, elder, child. The heat eased their chilled bones. The light banished the fear that lurked in the shadows. Kala looked down at her hands, scarred and strong. They had faced the lion, the thirst, the rival, and the saber-tooth, and they had won. They had brought the fire back from the realm of the lost. Mo raised his hand, the uninjured one, and offered a piece of the roasted wildebeest meat to Kala. She took it. It was a silent testament to the bonds of survival, the primal contract that had allowed them to cross the line from animal to human. They ate in silence, the firelight reflecting in their dark, intelligent eyes. Above them, high on the great ridge, the stars were cold and infinite. But down here, in the small, warm circle of firelight, was home. The journey out of Africa, the epic struggle of Homo erectus against the world, had only just begun. The fire keepers had endured.